It was a cold, overcast October night, and the air felt thick with the kind of eerie stillness that foreshadows a storm. Clara and I had finally decided to explore the abandoned Morrison mansion. Stories circulated around town about this place, whispered over hushed conversations in cafes and dimly lit bars. Everyone had their own version, horrific tales about the family that once lived there, secrets buried so deep that they were better left undisturbed. Clara and I had always been drawn to the unknown, captivated by urban legends and the thrill of mystery. So that night, compelled by a mixture of curiosity and audacity, we set out to uncover what everyone else seemed too afraid to acknowledge. As we approached the mansion, the towering silhouette of the Victorian structure loomed against the dark sky, its broken windows and dilapidated exterior casting strange shadows under the faint moonlight. Ivy crawled up the stone walls as if trying to strangle whatever life was left in the crumbling structure. The air grew colder as we drew closer, and an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. The wind rustled through the tall, leafless trees that surrounded the mansion, almost like a warning whisper, cautioning us to turn back. It was as if the house itself was alive, exuding an unsettling presence that filled the air with a palpable dread. I swallowed hard, trying to mask my unease. "It's just an old house. This'll be exciting," I said, my voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. I wanted to reassure myself as much as Clara, who hesitated beside me, eyes fixed on the darkened windows above. The front door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dark, seemingly endless hallway that stretched into obscurity. As soon as we stepped inside, a heavy silence swallowed us, muffling even the wind outside. It was a thick, suffocating quiet that seemed unnatural, almost as if it were deliberately holding back the sounds from the outside world. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mold, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly reminiscent of blood. Clara's flashlight illuminated the space, casting beams of light onto dust-covered furniture hidden beneath ghostly white sheets, their outlines hinting at a life long forgotten. Wallpaper peeled in strips from the walls, revealing cracks and patches of dark mold beneath. Our footsteps echoed as we made our way down the hallway, and I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something watching us. At the end of the hall, we entered the main room, which was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through a high, narrow window. An old, soot-stained fireplace sat in one corner, cold and lifeless, while a series of faded portraits clung to the walls. One in particular drew us in, as if calling to us. It was a family portrait, but the expressions on the faces were anything but comforting. A tall man with a stern gaze, a pale woman with hollow eyes, and two children stood side by side. A shy-looking boy and a young girl with a disturbingly intense stare. Her gaze was unnervingly direct, almost challenging. Something about her eyes felt wrong, hollow, like they held a dark secret that would never see the light of day. As Clara's candle flickered, I thought I saw her eyes shift ever so slightly, a glint of movement that made my stomach tighten. In the shadows near the fireplace, I noticed a door, almost hidden, partially obscured by an old cabinet. It was barely visible, as though it had been purposefully concealed. "Should we check it out?" I whispered, barely audible, trying to ignore the voice in my head screaming for me to leave. Clara nodded, her face pale yet determined. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. The air here was colder, thick with a wet, metallic scent that seemed to cling to the walls. Each step we took down those creaky stairs felt like an invitation to something sinister lurking below. When we reached the bottom, the basement unfolded before us in eerie silence, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere in the shadows. At first it seemed empty, save for an old wooden table positioned in the center of the room, covered in dust and cobwebs. Atop it lay a worn leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and stained with something dark and unsettling. An inexplicable force drew us closer, and Clara gingerly began to turn the pages. The journal, as we quickly realized, belonged to Arthur Morrison, the father from the portrait upstairs. The entries started innocuously, describing mundane daily routines, but as we delved deeper, Arthur's words grew increasingly erratic and disconcerting. He wrote about his youngest daughter, Lydia, and how she had begun to see strange shadows flitting outside her bedroom window. Shadows that would speak to her in whispers only she could hear. At first, Arthur dismissed them as childhood nightmares, but as Lydia's encounters grew more vivid and her descriptions more alarming, a sense of dread seemed to seep into his words. Further into the journal, Arthur's writing became desperate, describing Lydia's behavior as increasingly erratic, her once bright eyes turning dark and unfocused. Arthur grew convinced that something malevolent had latched onto his daughter, twisting her mind. In a final act of desperation, he and his wife decided to isolate her in the basement, believing this would rid her of whatever darkness had taken root in her soul. They confined her there, hidden from the world, hoping the evil would leave her. But in his final entries, Arthur admitted that he could still hear her voice, whispering from the shadows, calling to him in a tone that was both familiar and profoundly wrong. Our fingers hovered over the last page, where Arthur had written just one chilling line. "She is still here." Dark smudges marred the page, scratches and stains that looked unsettlingly like blood, as though the words themselves were a warning. A sudden scraping sound echoed through the basement, breaking the silence and sending a jolt of fear through me. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. In the dim, trembling light, Clara gasped and clutched my arm tightly. In the far corner, partially obscured by shadows, stood a figure. A young girl, her dress tattered and stained, her eyes dark, empty voids that seemed to draw in the light. Her gaze locked onto mine, cold and hollow, and her lips moved soundlessly before whispering a single haunting word. "Father." The word sent a surge of terror through me, rooting me to the spot. Clara's grip tightened, her voice barely a whisper. "Marcos, we have to go. Now." Her words broke the spell, and I forced my legs to move, pulling Clara up the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, the shadows seeming to press in around us, closer with every second. The whisper followed, growing louder, echoing through the walls like a chilling lullaby. "Father, I'm still here." We burst through the front door and into the cold night, gasping for breath, too terrified to look back. But as we reached the safety of the yard, I couldn't resist one last glance. Through a cracked basement window, Lydia's pale face stared back at us, her lips curving into a slow, sinister smile. She lifted a hand, waving goodbye, or perhaps promising to see us again. Since that night, Clara and I have never returned to the Morrison mansion. But every now and then, in the dead of night, I still hear her voice in the wind, soft but unmistakable, a faint, haunting whisper that reminds me she's waiting, somewhere in the darkness, for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover the secrets she guards in that cold, desolate basement.